Well, you had mentioned about the children giving you an opportunity to re-experience the world, and Jordan Hall had said a thing one time that I really liked, where he said, you should understand always as a parent that start from the perspective that you're two equivalent souls, you and your
Hmm.
children, and that you have something to offer them because you've been here a lot longer. You have the capacity to share with them all sorts of skills and patterns of behavior, and like you have a lot to help them with,
Yeah,
but never think that you have more to give them than they have to give you,
yeah, yeah.
because what they have to offer you is the wonder of the world that you've forgotten.
Hmm.
And I don't remember. I heard that sometime early on when shortly after my daughter was first born, and that was one of the ones that just
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's stuck with me ever since.
There's a lot to say about it. It's interesting that that's an argument that I make in a class that I teach, trying to explain the philosophy of Dionysius the Areopagite and
Oh
how
yeah,
he reverses the sense of eros. It's really interesting in the Neoplatonic tradition. Eros is love is usually understood as ascending,
right?
and therefore, according to kind of a standard sort of textbook Neoplatonism, everything in the world is constituted in its being through love of God, but God can't really love because love is always directed to what's above you that you sort of ascend to, and God can't ascend anywhere. But Dionysius kind of reverses all of that. It's really, I mean, it's there are all sorts of paradoxes and things unfold, one of the implications of without going into all those details, one of the implications of his thought is that you realize that eros, love as desire, is actually not only an expression of need; it can be an expression of generosity. And so
Mm-hmm.
I ask my students to consider, two different people who are, say, with a sense of mission. They have like a, sense of a Christian mission. They're going to work with the handicapped, and you compare the two. One of them says, I have so much to give to these poor people
Yeah, yeah.
that are suffering.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
going to go and be with them so that they can have some of my gifts. I can
oh yeah.
share it with them, and then compare that to another person who says, um, I go to the handicapped people because I've gotten to know them and I love to be with them. And
Yeah,
I find that they have more to give me than I to them. And now put yourself in the place of the handicapped person. Which one
yeah,
is actually, I
yes,
mean, the one who's the recipient of pure generosity feels humiliated and used, and
yes,
whereas
yes.
the in the other case you find that the need, giving to the other a need, is actually an incredibly generous
Mm-hmm.
way of
Mm-hmm.
affirming the other. And I think something like that
Yes.
really applies to our relationship with our kids and really everything in the world, but I mean, in a really
Yeah,
special way with our children.
yeah. Okay, so the proposed topic for this conversation was fatherhood.
Yeah,
Right. And this, I feel like now we've already dropped straight into
jumped
something
right into it. Yeah.
really profound with fatherhood, because there's so there's three levels that I want to pull in here
Okay.
to throw a frame and see how it relates. So
Yeah.
it's related to so this is in Jesus's story. The first scene is Jesus in the wilderness tempted by the devil.
Yeah.
And the third temptation as being sort of the temptation to make the world the way you want it to be,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
here's all the power, right, you
Right.
take all the power, you have, like, you're God's
You can.
son, right? You're in
Yeah.
touch with God, right? Like, I'll give you all the power, you make the world how it should be, right?
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course
Yeah.
Jesus rejects that by saying, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God and him only, right? This fundamental move of humility, that I will not take that place. And then the
Nice.
second being in the Lord's Prayer, which I think of as sort of it's like the fundamental key of how to orient yourself properly in the world,
Interesting. Yeah.
is thy kingdom come, thy will be done, which is the
Mhm.
same thing. It's that shift of the self into the position of always like always accepting what is for what it is
Yeah. Yeah.
without trying to make it what you think it should be. And
Yeah.
then this gets actualized in the Garden of Gethsemane when he prays, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done.
Hmm.
So there's this continual, like, it's not that Jesus doesn't have a will. It's not that he's not moving in, but it's always secondary and it's always placed in service of something higher. But there's always this rejection of, I know what is needed and I will fix this thing.
Hmm.
Like that part is
Yeah.
straightforwardly rejected. And if I if I hear what you're saying, and because this troubles me a lot about a lot of the attempts at justice that people bring into the world, especially
Yeah.
in these days, it's like, well, here's what will fix homelessness. So
Right.
let's do this thing. And you do this thing, but of course it doesn't fix homelessness.
Right.
And the father, okay, so to put a bow on what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say here, the father has the capacity to try to shape his children into what he thinks they should become, or he has the capacity to love them for who they are and live
Hmm.
in such a way that they want to become the way he thinks might be good for them,
Yeah.
purely of their own accord.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you raised some, I mean, just wonderful things. I mean, I think you've kind of put your finger on like the nub points of the whole gospel. Those are sort of the crucial moments. It's amazing. I mean, the things you just mentioned are, this is the heart of patristic theology, Maximus the Confessor. I mean, it took centuries for the church to unfold this idea of the will of Christ and so forth. But the heart of it. I mean, and this is
I'm so glad you brought in Maximus there because he's one of my most significant figures in my
okay.
in my thinking.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then that's I guess that's why it reminded me of. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. It's the thing. One of the things that's so interesting is I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between power and authority,
Oh yes. Okay. Yes. Yes.
and
Absolutely.
this seems to me what you're describing is
Yes.
an expression of authority, which is different from power. And authority always has this witness character. You rather than imposing your will is you see your will as a kind of an instrument by which you allow something greater than yourself to be realized. You sort of you bear witness
Oh.
to what is higher than you in order to try to help it be realized and what's given to you to it's given into your responsibility. You know,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
so
Okay. Okay.
authority, there's no such thing as an authority that doesn't acknowledge something higher.
Mm. Mm.
So that the will of the authority it's different. In the will of power, you impose your will. In the will
Yep.
of authority, you mediate the will of something
Yep.
higher,
Yep.
or the principle of order that's higher than you. Now, the thing about Christianity is that I have to say, this is one of the decisive points of uniqueness, I think, as far as I can tell, of Christianity is that I mentioned Neoplatonism. God can't really aspire
Right. Right.
to
Right. Right.
anything
Right.
because he's the highest. But in Christianity, you have the Trinity, and so you
Yeah.
have Jesus as God saying the Father is greater than I. It's a
Right.
line from John. So I mean, here God Himself is subordinating Himself to something higher. I mean, which is mind blowing and really
Yeah.
mysterious. But it shows that there's something that this isn't just subordinating oneself to what's higher is not just like an instrumental moment that you pass through until you reach the highest stage. There's something perfect about it already.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that
Yeah.
that's something that fathers and families have a special uh, but this is something really worth meditating on. You mentioned about the temptation to make kids into your own image. I don't know what it's like for other fathers. I had assumed that I would at least have something to do with like what my kids were like. I have learned that they are a reality unto themselves, and you have much less control over, power over what kind of person they are. You can
Mm,
you have a deep responsibility to mold things,
yeah.
but there's something it's humbling. It really is in a
Yeah.
really positive, good way, but painful too.
Yeah.
Learning how much less power you have over others. Now, this might be just my experience. I don't know. Maybe some people have children that more are more malleable to their will, but boy, that's never been my experience.
Well, let's just say that in my family of origin, it hasn't worked out that way. And in my family, my eldest is 2.5. So,
Yeah,
and she
yeah.
definitely, I mean,
You're at the
it's
beginning.
a well, it's a great joy to be in the position that I am, where my children are really young, and all of this in terms of my the way I'm trying to be a father is I, I have a lot like there's a lot of explored territory,
Yeah,
but there's not a lot of commitment to a particular angle or avenue.
yeah, yeah,
And so I'm very much, I mean, I'm finding what works, noticing what doesn't,
yeah,
noticing where like I
yeah,
have patterns in myself that don't make any sense and trying to understand those and help them get a little better. And anyway, I'm just
yeah,
constantly playing with the whole thing. And
yeah,
that there's a tremendous amount of joy that comes. It can be really challenging for sure, but there's a tremendous amount of joy that comes um when really like the best moments are when she becomes so much more of herself or my son
yeah,
becomes so
yeah,
much more of herself,
yeah.
not in spite of me,
Right.
but not the
Yeah,
same as
yeah,
me, and
yeah.
certainly not how I envisioned they would be.
Right.
But it emerges like who they are emerges as something more beautiful because
Yeah,
it's unexpected and
yeah,
like all that. Like that is just
yeah,
such a joyful moment. And
yeah,
I love this. I've not thought, I mean, I've thought a lot about power and authority. I had not encountered that idea of the aspect of witness as being a way to make the distinction. I really like that because and what kept coming up in my mind was the sort of in a lot of ways, especially my day-to-day thinking, I have a deep sense of affinity for sort of Taoist and Zen sensibilities. And there's something very there was something of that that felt present there because there's like the witnessing and that sort of like acknowledgement that one is sort of in between
yeah. Right.
and that therefore any exertion of power has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not
Right.
it doesn't even make sense to have some sort of arbitrary imposition of my will. That it's just an
Yeah.
absurdity in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, and then you experience your will as fruitful rather than as productive.
Oh
And
yeah, oh
the
that's
image
really
of
good. Yeah,
fruitfulness is just you receive and it grows within you. That's the way of witness. And in bearing witness, that's you're also teaching your children that a leader is one who obeys what's good, true, and beautiful. Courageously obeys what's good, true, and beautiful. So there's a you know we don't oppose leadership and obedience. They actually go together in all sorts of profound ways.
yeah,
um, in terms of the first things you were saying just about figuring out how to be a good father, to tie it into the first thing that we talked about a few moments ago. The very first thing I think that a father can do for his children is just love to be with them.
yeah,
To actually enjoy being with, and that,
yes,
I mean, it's amazing how much is being communicated to them in ways that you don't have to deliberately teach or explain. I mean, eventually that's going to be an important role, and eventually a child is going to want you to explain things.
yeah, yeah,
And that's something that we ended up. I say we, my wife took the lion's share of the burden, but we homeschooled our kids
right,
up until high school.
okay,
The one is still has not yet started high school. We've got three.
Okay.
She's 13 now. Um, but you real one of it seems to me that that experience has sort of brought home something about what it means to be a parent, a mother and a father, is that you're responsible not just for providing food and so forth to your kids. You're responsible, and again, not only for creating a home and shelter, you also are responsible for passing on the
Mm,
tradition.
yeah.
I need to try to understand the world better precisely so that I can pass this on to my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that I have a responsibility. One of the things it means to be a father is to learn about the world so that I can explain it to my kids. There's something really beautiful about that. Um, but
Oh,
it
yes.
does, it just takes away some of this kind of functionalizing
Yes.
of parenthood that we tend to
Oh, yeah.
slip into.
Yeah. Yeah. And making it all sort of about economic computation. And well, if childcare were cheaper, more people would have children and like those sorts of
Yeah,
things. Like,
right. And then you think of, I send them off to school. It's the teachers that are the experts that are responsible for, teaching them, and it's this expert that's responsible for that. And all I really have to do is provide food and, uh,
some, some,
entertainment.
some decent
you know,
experiences.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Occasionally
Yeah.
take them. Yeah, but it's very different if you think of yourself as really responsible for presenting the world to
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
presenting them to the world.
Well, I mean, understanding authority is authorship, right? That
Yeah, yeah,
there's, you know, I always think of J.K. Rowling, and and I don't know her like I'm not deeply invested in
yeah.
her or the Harry Potter universe, but at least as much as I understand it, the way she tells the story is that the whole like universe and story came to her
Hmm.
almost like it wasn't that she wasn't a writer or whatever before, but it incurred on her suddenly, and she
Yeah,
wrote the sort of the general structure of the story in a few hours, sort of thing. Like
yeah,
it just boom,
yeah.
right? And that, and even if that's not particularly correct for her, I know that it is for other people. And
Absolutely.
that way of thinking about authorship is that like you see something higher
Yes.
and you
Yeah,
translate it into a horizontally shareable like
yeah,
medium so that other people can participate in this higher order thing that you've seen.
yeah,
And in some sense, that's what I hear you saying is the role
yeah.
of a parent, right? It's like there is, because of the way that perception works and because of the hyper complexity of the world, the way that I teach my parents to pay, or the way that I teach my children to pay attention to things
Hmm.
does actually author the world they live in. The
Hmm.
way I tell them the story of what's important,
Hmm.
like it does author their world.
Yeah,
And to do
yeah.
that in a way that is not a production,
Right.
like you said, but is actually cultivating a fruitfulness,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Where it's like, because this is what I'm trying to do all the time is like take some of the more impactful, insightful, beautiful sort of discoveries and ideas from my journey through life, and how do I say this in a way that it lands for my children,
yeah, yeah,
not so that they get the concept that I have, I'm not interested in that, but so that they can see and live in the way that it's afforded me to see and live.
yeah. Yeah, you want to liberate them into seeing the world for themselves. I mean, that's
Yes,
at the heart of
exactly.
all this. Yeah, no, that image that you use is beautiful. That's a profound, I didn't even think about it in those terms, but artistic inspiration and connecting that with authorship, that's beautifully done. It is, I in fact, I was not thinking about authority and power. I was talking to my students just a couple of days ago about the imagination,
Mm.
and we were reading this beautiful essay by George MacDonald
Oh yeah.
on the imagination. Really interesting. But he talks about genuinely creative work.
Yeah.
Genuine a creative use of the imagination. Sorry about that. Um, uh, Always exceeds the particular uh, artists.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whenever whenever you read artists sort of explaining what they're doing, they always will say, "I don't know where the idea came from."
Yes.
It just sort of rises from deeply within you. You contrast that, when people talk about a work of art or a play or a story as being contrived,
Yep.
what they mean is this person, it's too deliberately put together, and so in a way it tends to have too simplistic a form.
Absolutely.
No, and that would be like power. You are
Yes.
making the decisions, you're putting these things pieces together, whereas with authority, it's arising within you, and it it and fruitfully emerges from you, and it has a life of its own, which
Yes.
then allows those who enter into it to be rejuvenated. They sort of
Yes.
share in the life of it. That's really interesting to think of, like parental authority along those lines. That's
Yes.
you should write a book.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be a great little reflection, I think.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
think I think
and then
oh, go ahead.
if I just one last point, just
Yeah.
because I don't want to lose it, but you were talking about teaching your children to attend to the world in a certain way. I mean,
Yeah.
this is why the first way to do that, obviously, is by attending to the world yourself. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
you sort of you it's not just that you're modeling it for them. Of course, you're doing that, but there's something about you're opening by your doing it. You're opening up in a way that they can enter into and do it on their own.
Yes.
And then you can also try to explain what's going on and point things out to them. But if you're pointing out to things that you yourself are not attending to, those instructions fall flat, and the kids,
Yes.
they might not realize it, but they don't believe it,
Yes. Yes.
and they won't
Yes.
really give themselves to it.
Yes. Yes, because there's a subtle value communication
Yeah.
in the way you show up, right? It's like what you were saying before that like the fundamental principle of fatherhood might be, I propose this might be the case, is that you enjoy being with your children.
Mm-hmm.
I pay a lot of attention to that when let's imagine I'm at work on a Thursday, right? And I'm slogging through trying to get somewhere. I'm not enjoying myself. It's like, well, so then I like to ask the question, where am I trying to get to?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the point where I'm going to sit down and relax and take a deep breath that I'm like, where am I struggling to get to? And that helps me a lot to come back into the present moment and enjoy where I am. But it also helps me a lot to notice what my highest goals are, right?
Yeah.
And work with those accordingly. And I like more and more I find that just being with my wife and my children, like playing on the floor at home once I get home, is more and more becoming the place intentionally, like the place that I'm wanting to get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like like you said, that it's a subliminal communication of value that happens there, right? And they know it. There's no way you can fake enjoying being with someone, right? Like if
That's right. That's
if
right.
somebody's not enjoying being with you, you will know it. Then you
Yeah.
like
No,
it
isn't
might
that funny? And that's why so much of parenthood goes on. It's like, be a good person and parent naturally, rather
yeah,
than here's your list of instructions of things to do.
yeah,
Because if you follow the list of instructions, it's going to be contrived and it's going to be
yes,
experienced that way. But if you just enter into the reality with love and wonder and enthusiasm, that kind of thing does just, automatically communicate it just spontaneously to your children
yeah,
and to everybody else. I mean, this is
exactly.
my work is teaching, and this happens in the classroom. I mean, it's at the heart of the matter.
Absolutely. Look, and so if you get, I think that if what I notice in myself is that when I'm in the place that I'm just enjoying being with my children, and my daughter loves to ask, "What's that?" Right now, like she's always, "What's that? What's that? What's that?"
Yeah,
And I notice that if there's a way that I can answer that because because I'm not enjoying considering what that is, and I'm wanting to, sort of
mm-hmm.
dismiss the moment and go back to
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was that I was doing before. And that is where, like you said,
Yeah,
the sorts of explanations begin to fall very flat very quickly. And it doesn't do good things for the experience of all of us. But if instead
yeah,
I actually take a minute and I sort of think of it from her perspective, and then I try to describe, like try to name the thing and give a little description of where it fits in
Yeah.
reality in a way that she might find helpful, but also that's not closed.
Yeah.
Like I really don't want to close anything. And like
Yeah. Yeah.
when that happens, it's
Hmm.
really cool and I enjoy it too. Like I enjoy it a lot more
Yeah.
as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, you genuinely do enjoy it. But here, this is this that's a nice example. Um, if if the child sort of says, what's that? And you think, oh, here we go again. You can't enter into it. And you might give a perfectly good explanation, but the child doesn't feel satisfied.
Right. Yeah.
And also, if I mean, what's interesting, this is something this philosopher that I love, Ferdinand Ulrich, talks about. I can sort of transpose one of his examples to this one. If you were to just, instead of, like, the child is pointing to a flower and says, what's that?
Yeah.
Instead of looking at the flower, you look at the child and you just say, oh, what a wonderful person you are for being so curious. You are so smart. You're so curious. The child isn't thinking about himself or herself. You know, your daughter, when she asks these questions, she's not thinking about herself. She wants to know what that is.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is, if you really pour yourself into contemplating the flower with her eyes,
Yeah.
you actually are attending to her at the same
Yes.
time.
Yes. Yes.
You're affirming her in a really profound way at her roots, in a way that's more profound than if you were talking to her and ignored her question about the flower.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So weirdly, you're
Yes.
looking away from her at the flower, but in a profound way, you're actually being with her and affirming her in herself much more profoundly. And
Yes.
I mean, because you're taking her question seriously.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And you're affirming the reality. If you looked at her, you'd be dismissing her question. So she, as a questioning child, would be neglected, would be
Right.
ignored.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's such an interesting thing,
It
how
is.
looking away can be the deepest way of looking at, in a sense.
Yes. Yes. So there's this thing I noticed. It was when I was getting her out of bed when
Hmm.
she was around 1 year old, when, around the time that my son's at now, where he's just now
Hmm.
starting to, we're starting to be able to have micro conversations, right? Like
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
carrying a thread
yeah,
for a little bit. Like he'll turn one next week.
yeah.
Um, and
Wow.
and I noticed that when I would get her out of bed and I would come in and say, all right, we're going to get you out of bed. We're going to change your clothes. We're going to change your diaper. We're going to go do this, this, this. And I came in with my whole like set of agenda that I just brought her
Hmm.
along with me.
Hmm.
Um, it would take a long time, if it ever happened during that wake window, that we would sort of get on a shared wavelength,
Hmm.
that we were sharing the same sort of, that she could understand what I wanted and I could understand what she wanted. We worked together.
Yeah. Yeah, that expression, shared wavelength, it sounds very 60s or whatever, but I mean, there's no better way to put it. That's just a good way to express the point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
sorry I interrupted.
No, that's yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's the language part is funny because we deeply need a rehabilitation of the terms of like frequency
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
vibrations and energies and those sorts of things
Yeah,
that they got
that's
so
right.
woo that
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, anyway. But what I noticed was that there were a few times that I would go into a room and instead of doing anything of my own accord, I would just wait until she did something. So
Hmm.
she might
Hmm.
say, oh, there's my horsey daddy, right? Or this, look at that book, or whatever thing, right? And if I just went with her and talked about that
Hmm.
horsey and talked about that book and didn't even ask her too many questions, right? Because it didn't really work too much to say, how did you sleep? Did you have
Yeah,
any dreams? That was too much. She didn't run it, right? But if I shared her attention, if I
yeah,
noticed
yeah.
what she was paying attention to, and I like joined in with, like, she's paying attention in a stream like this, and I can come in and join her in this and start
Hmm.
describing it, right? Using my language to describe her experience. She suddenly trusts that I respect her experience
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
profound way. And once that happens, she trusts my direction
Yeah,
towards
right.
of where to look because
She trusts your authority.
yeah, you're right,
Yeah,
exactly. Because I witnessed her first, right?
yeah,
I witnessed
yeah,
her first, and then she respects the authority, is
yeah,
what the feeling is like. And I've ever since, whenever I am like capable of doing that, because I'm certainly not perfect, but like when I'm capable and I'm remembering and I'm able to be present and do that, I've never had it like not work.
yeah, yeah. That's right. That's right. And then the child is just calmed in that. There's a sense in which if she can trust your authority, she's going to be okay,
Yeah,
and so she can play. She
yeah,
can kind of let herself go and kind of really, there's no need to be kind of self-protective in a way that then turns the world into an enemy that has to be contended with somehow. But you're able just to get inside of things very, very spontaneously and organically.
yes, yeah, yeah, yep. But it
Yeah,
takes, I mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
oh, sorry. I think what it feels like it takes is the genuine presence and activity of humility.
Hmm.
Like humility in the sense of not having any, like the thing that has to be absent is the attempt to exert and power
Yeah,
towards any production. Like if
yeah,
that's present, the whole thing doesn't work at all.
right. Forcing it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, right, it might be the case that especially a child, you know, there's an opposite danger of becoming simply the follower of one's child,
Right.
and whatever the
Yes.
child does is right, and you conform yourself to the child's behavior, and there too the child sort of can't trust you
Yes.
because you're not showing it, showing her what to do. You're not showing her anything, in a way you're requiring her to show you things.
Right.
And while there's a place for that and a moment for that, the child wants a father, wants her parents, and she wants authorities to know what they're doing so that she doesn't have to be responsible for things. So I mean, it becomes a real delicate sort of play.
Hmm.
You need to be responsible and take a kind of initiative, but it can't be an initiative that's just an imposition of your own idea. It's got to be
Yeah.
responsive, you know, but there's that interplay of being responsive, but also guiding. It's an art, an
Well,
art form.
I think, that to make a distinction there, what comes up for me is you talked about the difference between, or you talked about authorship as being this sort of like you're witnessing the thing that is above. Hold on, sorry, my light is doing something weird here. Okay. Where you're in touch with the good, true, and the beautiful that's above
Yeah,
you. You're witnessing
yeah,
it and you're bringing it down. And that actually means something, right? Like
yeah,
there's if the humility is being born out of a place where it's genuine humility, it's not just sort of cowardice and weakness,
yeah.
right?
Right.
Then it's because there is an attachment to something higher, and there's going to be an organic sort of directedness to things,
Yeah.
you
Nice.
know, and there will be a
Nice.
sort of, and there are all sorts of parameters and requirements and sort of, and obviously if necessary forceful enforcement of things, right? Like my child's doing
Right.
something dangerous, or like when she hits her brother,
Yeah.
which happens occasionally, right? Like there's consequences for that, and they're
Right.
straightforward and they happen, but
And it's
like
good to learn that. It's liberating to actually learn that for the child. As painful as it is,
yeah,
they become more fully themselves actually in coming to recognize those things.
yeah, 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 because it gives you something to kick against too, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there has to be
Yeah.
some sort of structure. Yeah, yeah. But I'm really glad you brought that up though, because yeah, I definitely would not want it to make it seem like authority is all about, you know, the humility of coming under.
Well, the way you put it is it's a really nice. I mean, I think you got the um subtlety of the distinction that when you're responding, you're not just responding to, in the first place, to your daughter, you're responding in the deepest way to the higher order of the true, the good, and the beautiful, which has implications both for you and your daughter.
Yeah.
And then you're responding to her in relation to that. But if it were simply responding to your daughter, then you would have the tail wagging the dog phenomenon, or and things would be disordered.
Yeah.
And if you weren't responding at all to your daughter, that would be another form of disorder. But if you
Yeah.
respond to her within responding to an order that transcends both of you,
Yeah.
then there's going to be a kind of a generosity in the way um, that you parent, that you guide,
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
shepherd. I mean, this is a we're sort of explicating the phrase "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." I mean, that's kind of what we're doing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yes. Yeah, and the notion that to be well, I think to be what would be properly called a Christian would be to to I guess live is the right word, but like I mean that in a really deep sense, like live as a
Mhm.
as the totality of your reality
Mhm.
being the coming together of earth and heaven, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you live in such a way that the coming together of earth and heaven that happens through your life, because that's sort of
Mhm.
like the precondition of being a human being. That's what is happening in your life. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if you live your life in such a way that it is thy kingdom come, thy will be done, then then your life becomes a portal of goodness into the
Mhm.
into the world, into the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And it's coming together in you and then in a fruitful way so that you're also communicating that and generating that same synthesis, that same
Yeah.
sort of creative coming together to other people.
Yeah, at least it becomes on offer to others
Yeah, yeah,
in a
yeah.
fuller way.
Right, right. Yeah, and then we learned that, the first place this happens is in our home. And if it doesn't happen there, it's going to have a trouble happening anywhere else.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's part of why I don't know. I'm so hmm. That's part of why I was so excited to talk with you about this is because I knew that it would bear fruit in all sorts of fascinating directions. Because in from an autobiographical point of view, like the point I'm at now is a really high leverage one in in terms of in terms of the in terms of my capacity and pattern of being a father.
Okay.
And I think in those sorts of times, crystallizing out
Hmm.
really important um, and meaningful core aspects of what this looks like when it's good
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
is profoundly. I mean, it's profoundly important to me because if I'm in a high leverage position, if this can become the new ground from where I grow as a
Hmm.
father, right, and it's built on those sorts of pillars,
Yeah,
that's a powerful thing.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. My wife and I were talking about this the other day that sometimes you can think, well, what's the point of philosophy? You're just sort of talking about things. Why talk about them? Why not just live them? And the point is not to talk about them. The point is to live them. The point is not to talk about love. The point is to actually love. And that's in one sense true. But it's really helpful to keep in mind, and I know that this has been my experience, and I see it in my kids too, that coming to understand something actually inspires you to live it better. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
so it's not just a matter of putting it in practice. You're not If you don't know what you're putting into practice, you're just blindly exerting effort.
Yeah.
But what understanding does is give it sort of makes present to you an ideal that inspires you and draws you out of yourself to try to conform to it, so
Yeah.
that actually, talking about things, if you reach a good level of insight
Yeah.
into something, it spontaneously transforms your way of acting. So you don't change your action by forcing yourself. I mean, this is back to the whole power
Yes.
and authority thing. It's
Yes.
not because you're exerting power over your will and power over your life and try to make things happen differently. You deepen your reception of reality
Yeah.
in its truth, beauty, and goodness, and in these, in the nature of these things that you come to understand better, you see them more clearly. And by seeing them more clearly, you're inspired, you're inspired to enact them. You're
Yes.
drawn into
Yes.
them in a way that's much deeper than just forcing yourself to do it would
Oh
be.
my goodness. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
100% yes. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
I am of the opinion, and I feel as if John would have some magnificent arguments to buttress this.
yeah,
So I'll tag that, but I don't have them at hand. But I I I'm of the opinion that if one has had an insight, one will have a behavior change.
yeah,
Like
yeah, right,
it's not a genuine insight.
yeah,
You might have a perspective shift. You might be able to understand a concept that you didn't before. But unless it actually impacts the way you live your life and the way you see the world,
yeah,
then it's not a real insight because you haven't seen into
yeah,
the
right.
world,
That's
you
right.
know?
That
And
yeah,
go ahead.
that is so good and so important, that you can't know anything unless you love it, and you
No,
can't really love it unless you know it, and those are both true, and that it touches on the very point that you're making there.
yeah. Yes. 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 And when you talked about the goodness, truth, and beauty of the thing, right? It's like once if one understands that goodness, truth, and beauty is actually all that you want. Like
Hmm.
there's nothing else you actually want. Like
Hmm.
when you're declaring your wants, you measure them against how good, true, and beautiful they are, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
it then when you have an insight, you see something as being it's you see something as being more true, good, and beautiful than you understood it to be before,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And therefore it reorients you. It's a metanoia moment.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
shifts something fundamental in you, and then it sort of becomes absurd to do anything else.
Hmm.
It's like,
Hmm.
well, why would you do anything else?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's liberating. That's really, really beautifully put. I think you nailed it with that. And yeah, there's this is the difference. Josef Pieper, the great German philosopher from the last century. I don't know if you recognize his name. One of his most famous books is Leisure: The Basis of Culture. I
Oh,
I recommend that. I think you would enjoy that. But anyway, he contrasts the position that he lays out with Kant, who thinks that something is only good if you've exerted a lot of effort. This is a
mm,
simplification of Kant, but it's a kind of a mood that Kant's philosophy generates, that this is why someone who struggles against himself to be virtuous is
yeah.
more properly virtuous than a person who's
Oh dear.
naturally virtuous and acts normally.
Oh dear.
And Pieper says, no, you've got it exactly wrong.
Yeah.
And there's something about, I mean, think about
The river of
how,
life flows.
yeah, yeah, right. That's right. And how, if something is the fruit of your own effort, you're not really transcending yourself in it.
Absolutely.
You're just obsessed with yourself and your own perfection and trying to be more virtuous or more, whereas, uh, it becomes much more playful.
Hmm.
you know Playfulness is actually much more
Oh,
important than people realize.
oh my. Yes.
And joyful and effortless, if you understand it in the way you just described it, where you deepen your understanding of things, and that understanding itself provides the energy to do it. And
Absolutely.
you find yourself doing something rather than forcing yourself to do it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that gets into you much more deeply, and it also brings you much further out of yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah, okay. Well, the image that I had come up there at the end, there's a bunch of stuff, but one of the things was
Mhm.
the production of useful energy, right?
Mm.
Pretty much the only way that we as human beings create for ourselves excess useful energy is by breaking things apart, right? If you take a hydrocarbon and you break it apart, you get energy out of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And you can all sorts of ways. Nuclear fission is ultimately this, right? And we're
right.
trying to work on nuclear fusion where you put things together and you get a lot more energy, right?
Yeah.
But it seems to me like it's very much something like that. It's like, well, you can create an energy for a particular behavior pattern or to move in a direction based on breaking yourself in half and fighting
Hmm.
against yourself. And there is a certain
Hmm.
energy that comes from that. Like you can do that. But it's
Yeah,
ultimately always destructive. It's downward. Your capacity always becomes less.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
become less,
You
therefore.
become you become spent. You feel spent,
Yes, exactly.
and yeah,
Exactly.
kind of. Yeah.
But there's a different place to stand where there's a redemption of whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a broken part of you. It's like there's a broken part of me. I can split myself in half and contain that broken part. And now I have
Hmm.
much less energy to exert towards whatever goodness, right? Or if there's a different place to stand where this part of myself that is broken can become redeemed.
Yeah,
Like now I am whole
yeah,
and I'm no longer holding any energy within myself. So then everything can just open up. And
yeah.
that to me, I mean, you said to me there was a point where we were in a conversation. I was talking about this exact thing where I was trying to, I don't remember even what it was about, but I was fighting with myself about something. And you said,
Yeah.
you said the thing about fighting against yourself is that no matter whether you win or you lose, you lose. and
Yeah.
and that stuck with me ever since, and it's helped me a lot because
Hmm.
it like that was the moment that I think that was the moment that insight really landed for me in a new way of like if I'm in a situation where something's going poorly and I'm wanting it to get better, the answer is never to fight myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I may not know what the
Yeah.
answer is, and it takes a
Yeah.
certain like it takes the virtue of patience to sit in whatever
Hmm.
tension it is to allow it to be revealed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
once it is revealed, there's a wisdom that comes on offer with that of how to direct yourself such that you get a fusion reaction of more wholeness and more actual energy availability rather than a, a fission reaction where one.
Dissipation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a nice image. Uh, and I like how you put it, waiting for it to reveal itself. If you, one can panic if you're stuck somewhere and you need to find a way out, and the temptation grows to finally just force your way through. But almost inevitably, that kind of thing, in the long run, turns out to have been a bad solution or an inadequate solution. It takes a lot of courage and proper kind of hope
Mm,
to wait for
yes.
what it is to become apparent so that then you can respond to, and that becomes a much more positive movement. You're affirming
Yes.
something that you see and following it rather than negating something that's there and trying to get away from it.
Yeah. Yes.
Very often, I mean, this is the essence of depression is whatever it is about the reality in which you, or this is one dimension. Obviously, depression is a very complex thing, but you despair of the reality that is present to you, and because there's nothing that is really grabbing you,
Yep.
as we say, and
Yep.
and keeping you afloat,
Yeah.
you end up sort of stuck in yourself, and then you
Yep.
you turn more deeply inward and just spiral kind of into yourself. And that's
Yes.
that's an understandable temptation, but really is a temptation because the moment you
Yeah.
turn into yourself, you're not you've lost the possibility of being redeemed
Yeah.
in the way that you're saying, because there's got to be something outside of you that grabs you,
Yes.
for you to be redeemed properly, and whether that be another person, I mean, this is how we understand the grace of God too, which is
Yes.
given to
Yes.
us, but it's also, um, uh, Iris Murdoch. Do you know
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
she talks about um, falling into a mood of I might be changing some of her words here, falling into a kind of a depressed state, um, and then suddenly you hear a bird sing a kestrel outside your window, and there's a kind of beauty to it, and suddenly it's like all of the this mist that was starting to engulf you just
Yes.
burns away, and suddenly there's a kind of illumination, and it's not like the problems you were facing have changed, but you
Yes.
now suddenly see them we say in perspective,
Yes. Yes.
and that perspective comes because you've been liberated to something greater, that you can now look at these problems. If from the inside they look infinite, but from the outside you see they're actually quite small in relation to this bigger picture. And it's
Oh,
the song of the bird, that
yeah.
can do. I mean, it's really
It's beauty.
remarkable how simple it can be. It's beauty. It's always going to be beauty.
It is. Beauty
Always.
will save the world.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
isn't
man.
that something?
Yeah. It's so,
Yeah.
I mean, that, like what you described right there, thank you. That was really good. That's exactly what I've been going through recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in a really challenging time, there's a collapsing that can happen into the problem, right? Where the problem feels infinite, insurmountable, sort of fundamental, like
Yeah.
all of those things. And 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 the moments and then it like and then an insight happens for whatever
Yeah.
reason, but it's always
Yeah.
some incursion of beauty. It's always an incursion of beauty. Sometimes,
Yeah.
like for all sorts of different reasons. Sometimes it comes through prayer. Sometimes it comes through the experience with another person, my wife especially, right? Other
Yeah.
people. Sometimes it is like last night. There was a beautiful sunset here at the beach, and I just sat there and watched it, and it just like
Yeah.
everything just opened because I'd been having a difficult day with it, and it. So I've thank you because that's
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
the reality that I've been
Or
living.
music can be
Oh
such a
yeah,
profound, or like a good novel. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, you realize that there are lots of remedies that are offered to us
yeah,
in the
yeah,
world,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we tend to forget them. Because
yeah,
as you were putting it, the problem ends up setting the terms, and
exactly.
when the problem sets the terms, you're really going to be hopeless. You need
Yes,
something else to set the terms for the problem.
yeah,
And
yes,
that's not overlooking the seriousness of the problem or neglecting it, but it's just putting it in its place in the bigger picture.
yes. I also want to put a highlight on the point that you made where you said you didn't say it in exactly these words, but what I heard was that courage and hope are sort of the preconditions for the patience necessary to
Yeah,
sit in that spot and wait for
yeah,
beauty to call to you and
yeah,
instead of panicking. And I think that like
yeah,
if there's one like reality that I have lived over this past year with a lot of suffering in it, it has been to cultivate that sensibility and that
yeah,
capacity. And that
yeah,
feels exactly right to me.
yeah, yeah. Right, right. You see how all these things really fit together.
Absolutely.
These
Yeah,
things,
exactly.
who would have thought that courage has something to do with the experience of beauty, or
Yeah.
with, insight? These they seem to be unrelated, but you start to, when you get to the depths of something, you start to see how all these things really fit together. It's
Yeah.
quite
Yeah, and
quite
how
remarkable.
the golden mean of every virtue is dependent on the proper golden mean of all the others.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
That's
like,
right.
like
Yeah, that's a big theme for Pieper too. I
okay,
so as if I just reading recommendations just from this conversation. So Joseph Pieper, I
yeah,
think you would really like him. He tends
yeah,
to write these little books,
okay,
and
great. I
he's
love
written
little
on a
books.
bunch of and he's extremely accessible.
Okay,
Actually, it's interesting. Another philosopher whom I've just discovered the last couple of months that reminds me of Joseph Pieper, but he's much more contemporary. He's writing right now,
okay,
and he's more involved in discussions with postmodern philosophy.
mm,
Is a man. Tell me if you've heard of him. Byung-Chul Han
Oh
is
yes,
his name.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I have one of his books.
Okay,
Um,
he's great.
oh my goodness, I haven't read it yet, but it's sitting on my dresser at home.
I heard John
Something about
Bernanke
ritual.
mention him. Yeah, the disappearance of ritual.
That one.
Great,
Yep.
great book. Yeah,
Okay.
he's really good. And then a third about fatherhood. The most beautiful thing I've ever read about fatherhood. It's actually this is the first thing I ever did was translate this book. It was in a really rough time for myself. I discovered the writings of Charles Piggy. So that's Peguy,
Okay.
a French poet, and he wrote a book called the Portal of the Mystery of Hope. It's
I love it.
it's like a poem. It's a meditative poem, but
Oh,
it's
heck
really
yeah.
life changing. And he's got some of the most profound insights on fatherhood. These are all three of these are very accessible writings, but I think you would really enjoy them.
Awesome. Awesome. I will, yes, thank you very much. And the Joseph
Pieper, yeah,
Pieper book
it's
is Leisure as the Basis
Pie.
of Culture.
Yeah, that's his best known. But if you look him up, so his last name is spelled Pieper.
Okay.
If you look him up, you'll see, there are 30 books that he did.
Yeah.
They're all small. And if you find something that looks like, he's got one about beauty,
Yeah.
Lover Can Sing, it's called, um,
Nice.
uh, yeah, you'll see he talks about many different things, and there'll be certainly something that you'll find especially interesting, but highly
Wonderful.
recommend. Yeah,
Well, we could always, as always, we could talk much longer than we have time for.
yeah. That's the joy of it. But
Thanks
we'll have
for,
another occasion.
yes, yes, and hopefully sooner than a year next time.
Yeah.